(10.7) Complex numbers. So, this section, it's called complex numbers, but we're not just going to be looking at complex numbers. We're also going to be looking at something called imaginary numbers. Now, this is kind of weird. The first example I have up here is the square root of -36, right? I mean, we just talked about how you cannot have negatives underneath your radicals. And for years and years and years, the mathematicians said, you can't have negatives underneath your radicals, right? Right? Of course you can. But some mathematicians, I think, got kind of bored and said, well, what if you can, right? What if we just make up a letter that represents the square root of a negative number? Technically, what I mean is, let's say that the square root of -1, let's use the number I. Here they call it an imaginary unit, right? Sometimes we think of them as imaginary numbers. We're not saying that it's a real number that has any physical meaning to it. But once they sort of decided a name for the square root of -1, then they could start to do lots of cool stuff, like evaluate square root of -36, right? Or maybe they could have complex numbers and graph them and make fractals and all these psychedelic pictures. I don't know if you know anything about fractals, but it's all based on this branch of mathematics. It all started with some mathematicians saying, oh, let's call the square root of -1 I. Now, this might seem weird to you because, you know, you're just starting in math, but as you continue through math, the higher math, this happens a lot. Okay, they say, you know, let's call something that didn't really have a real application to it, call it a letter, and kind of do math on it. There's lots of sort of imaginary math in higher math. It's fun. I definitely recommend continuing in math. Anyway, coming back to this, the one kind of imaginary thing we're going to look at, this I, something else I want to point out that we're going to be using today, which is, it says here that I squared equals -1. And this is going to be important as we do a variety of different stuff with imaginary and complex numbers. Why is I squared equal to -1? That seems kind of weird. Well, think about our definition. Our definition says the square root of -1 equals I. What does that mean? That means I is a number that when you square it, you get -1, right? So that must mean that I squared equals -1. So these are two different ways of sort of thinking about this letter that they've labeled for the square root of -1. You can think of it as the square root of -1, or that it's a number, when it's squared, it's -1. So I squared equals -1. So what the kind of thing that we'll do on some of our first examples is just try to write the square root of -36 using this letter I. And you know, most of you can tell right away what it will be, but let's say we're going to kind of break it down. So this would be -1 times 36, and we can break it into two different radicals, right? Showing a lot of work here. Square root of -1, square root of 36. For the -1, we're going to write the letter I. And for the square root of 36, we're going to write a 6. And normally, we like to put our coefficients in front of our variables, even if they're not really variables. They're actually the square root of -1. A lot of times, you'll see your I in cursive. This is my attempt at writing it in cursive. Okay, just kind of, I don't know if it's really cursive. It's like italicized or something like that. So, square root of -36 is okay. 6I is a better way of writing it. We still don't really like writing the negatives underneath the radicals. It's better if we write it in this form with the I.